Okay. So at this point in time, we've already started our Zoom. So on behalf of Seattle AWAS, welcome to our March program. I am Retha Weeks. I am the current Seattle AWAS treasurer, and I'm also on the board. So our Seattle AWAS monthly programs are open to the public, men and women, all ages and all degrees or areas of interest in science. And we believe it's important and there's a benefit to bringing people together every month to meet new people and to share ideas. And I do, again, want to welcome you that are joining us in person, and we also have those who are joining us on Zoom. If you're on Zoom, we hope that at some point you'll be able to switch between speaker mode, view, and gallery mode. And part of that is that we would like to introduce you to each other, because part of the first step of getting to communicate is to know who's in the room. So I'm going to be asking a few questions, and I'm going to ask those of you in the audience to raise your hand. Those of you that are on Zoom, if you're on gallery view, you'll be able to see the hand raising as well. So first question is, how many of you are AWAS members? We have some, and we hope the rest of you will join. And then we'd like to know a little bit about your area of work or your area of interest. So how many of you work or have a great interest in the biological sciences? Okay, pretty good number. What about the computer technology area? For those of you who can't see, we have a lot in the computer tech area. And what about other areas such as math, engineering, or environment? Do we have people? Good number of hands there. Okay, and then how many of you have at least a vague idea of what circadian rhythms are? Okay, our speaker's interested in that. Okay, and how many of you feel like your sleep cycle is out of sync with your circadian rhythms? Okay, at least some of us. Okay. Well, I think you're certainly in the right place if you want to learn more about circadian rhythms. And the people in the room that I hope you're going to meet this evening also have that same interest. So there will be opportunities to chat afterwards, but I hope that you've had some time before the program starts to meet some of the people that are in the room with us today. At this time, I would like to introduce our Seattle AWAS president, Dr. Tracy Popowicz. She's going to tell you a little bit about AWAS.
Thanks for finding us tonight at the STEAM plant. Yay! We did it. Okay. Oh. Oh, there we go. All right. Some of you have seen these slides before, but maybe there are a few here that haven't. So I wanted to give a brief introduction of who Seattle AWAS is. So since 1971, AWAS has been a resource network and voice for women in science, technology, engineering, and math. And our impact is nationwide through over 30 chapters distributed across the country. So we're the Seattle chapter, and we've been active since 1985. So our vision statement is that we believe in a world where Seattle women of all ages are actively supported in STEM hobbies, studies, and careers. We believe the entire Seattle community will benefit when women are positively represented, compensated, and recognized for their achievements in all STEM pursuits. I like that. And our mission is to create a broad, interdisciplinary, welcoming environment to advance the careers of women and girls in STEM. So as Retha said, we have monthly events that are free and open to the public, focusing on STEM research and professional development. So we'll have a few more programs this year. We offer a GEMS program, which stands for Girls in Engineering, Math, and Science. And it's a program for 7th and 8th grade girls. And it focuses on enhancing their interests and mentoring them in STEM activities. We also do mentoring for adult women. So adult women are paired with mentors, and it can be a group that's paired with one mentor, or it can be a one-on-one interaction as well. And so our mentoring program is underway this year, and will continue through May, I believe. And then we have a scholarship committee too, and we award scholarships in amounts of $1,000 or more, and it's open to women who are majoring in a STEM field and will be juniors or seniors at a four-year college or university in the state of Washington. And we also give awards at our annual banquet. And this year, our banquet is going to be on Tuesday, June 17th, and it will be in the Center for Urban Horticulture. So we'll be honoring outstanding women in STEM for science, innovation, leadership, and education achievements. So these are our winners this year. So for science, technology, advancement, and leadership, this award will go to Dr. Sarah Keller at UW Chemistry. For early career achievement in STEM, this award will go to Dr. Allison Feeder in the UW Genome Sciences program. And for excellence in STEM education and outreach, Dr. Agnieszka Miguel in Seattle University's Electrical and Computer Engineering Department. So again, this is Tuesday, June 17th at the UW Center for Urban Horticulture. We're looking for table sponsors. So this would support our banquet and our programs in STEM. And we would like to have some sponsors for the event as well. So please let us know if that is something that you would be interested in. Individual ticket sales are starting April 1st, which is coming up soon. And that can be found on our website, seattleawis.org. So come join us. Seattle AWIS is a volunteer and donation-run organization, and we'd love to have you as part of our community. So become a volunteer or make a donation or fund a scholarship, and we're glad you're here tonight. Thank you.
Okay. So our program tonight features Lynne Peeples. She is a science journalist, a speaker, and an author. Lynne grew up in the Northwest, but she lived and worked in New York and now calls Seattle as her base. She has interests in science, in health, and the environment. So, but instead of me telling you about Lynne's background, I've asked her to tell you about her education and career path. And I encourage you to take notes of questions that you have while she's speaking, because when she's done, we have a microphone and we will ask you to go to the microphone. You'll have an opportunity to ask questions. And those of you who are joining us virtually, if you will put your questions in chat, we will also get them asked. So at this time, please welcome Lynne Peeples.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for coming. I've got my timer on here. All right. So yes, a little bit about me. As she said, I did grow up in the area. I'm a Rubin High School graduate. Went to college in Minnesota where I majored in math, and then went on to grad school in biostatistics in Boston. Worked in crunching numbers for a few years for mostly HIV, AIDS clinical trials, and some environmental health studies too. And then I realized that that wasn't my passion. Searched through other STEM fields to find what I really wanted to do with my life, and discovered that you could get paid to write about science. So essentially, I could make a career out of being a student. I could just keep learning from the experts, from people passionate about the sciences. And so I signed me up. So I went back to school in New York and since then, I've been a science journalist. So it's been about 15 years. I started my career at HuffPost as the environmental health reporter. And over the last decade plus, I've been freelancing. So writing about primarily medicine, health, and the environment. And I especially love to write about where those things intersect. I'm very much into that interdisciplinary idea. And that kind of leads to the topic of my book. So the last 3 years or so, this has been my focus, circadian rhythms. And my book was published in September, end of September. So it's been a few months now. And thank you. And I'm still obsessed with circadian rhythms. There's just so much that, even a book cannot capture nearly all the applications and the emerging science that's continuing to unfold. So I hope you'll get as excited as I am about the topic, if you aren't already, as we go here. So I thought we'd start with that one time I camped in a sunflower maze. Totally normal, but I'd been hearing, well, how many people have ever noticed or heard about the idea that sunflowers are always facing the sun? Okay, so that probably more people knew about that than I hadn't even heard that was a thing. But as soon as I heard that this idea of that sunflowers follow the sun existed, I heard that was actually a misnomer. And so I wanted to see for myself. So I found a sunflower maze in Duval, and the owner was very kind and let me camp with the sunflowers. And here are some photos from my time there. So this is the same sunflower. Obviously, it has not bloomed yet. So this is late summer. The first photo is around sunset, a little before sunset. You can see it's facing the sunset. That next photo I took right before I crawled into my tent and went to sleep. It was about 10 p.m. You can see that it's starting to poke up towards the night sky. That next photo was after I set my alarm for 3 a.m. and wandered around the sunflower maze with my red headlamp. Kind of creepy. And you can see, and then that last photo is at dawn. So it was like 5, 6 a.m. You can see how it hasn't really moved. The sunflower was already anticipating, ready for the sunrise in the dark. And so that brings up the question, it's not really following the sun, is it? It couldn't, so it was moving in the darkness of night. So better than following the sun is anticipating it. It was actually really recently, 2016, I believe, that scientists proved that sunflowers had internal circadian rhythms. It was only that recently that they could prove that was the case. They did some crazy experiments where these are down in California, but they had sunflowers in pots, and they let them follow the sun through sunset. Once it got dark, they spun the pot around to trick the sunflower to see what it would do. And sure enough, it turned again and it missed the sunrise. So that, along with some other experiments, showed that indeed there's these internal clocks programming the sunflower and its behaviors. And sunflowers, of course, are far from alone. All of life evolved on this planet that's spinning, and it's spinning at a tilt, that we know that it creates the seasons. So we have all these rhythms, and life learned to anticipate those rhythms because it was beneficial. So just like for the sunflower, it's advantageous if it's facing the sun ahead of the sunrise, it can warm its face sooner and it can attract pollinators sooner. So there is a survival benefit here. We can say the same about so many species. We can say the same about parasites. We know that malaria, sleeping sickness, those parasites have rhythm. We know that there's a species of penguin that I learned about on an island in Australia that will anticipate the certain time of day that is optimal to sprint home from, to actually burrow home to, at the end of the day, to make sure it optimizes its time for feeding but minimizes the chances that a predator catches it. And it's found that just peak perfect time. And so now the area is actually capitalized on the tourism about this, and they have this penguin parade that's advertised. You can watch these penguins parade waddle home at this certain hour because they can predict it. So you got sunflowers, you got penguins, you've got parasites, and of course you've got people. So it can look far back into history, but humans have always really intuitively known that it pays to be in sync with the earth, right? We know that ancient Egyptians recognized the importance of morning light. We know that pyramids were built, facing the sun, or they followed the sun. And today at least I can speak for myself that I very much value daylight and views. That first picture up there is my apartment. I am very lucky to have a big picture window. That was a selling point for me. We put a premium on daylight in spaces. Cats and people like the sun. We like basking in the sun. We like camping. We're drawn to being outside during the day. We're drawn to campfires at night. And of course, we feel miserable if we eat late or sleep poorly, although maybe we haven't quite connected the dots on why. And all this we kind of know, but do we? And this is where science is confirming our intuition. So what are circadian rhythms? Well, firstly, we know that we have clocks that are ticking in nearly every cell of the body. So scientists are unveiling this network, or this symphony, you can think of it, of clocks throughout our body. We've got this master clock in the brain, and it's acting as this conductor of all these clocks throughout the body. And they're coordinating to prime the body to do the right things at the right times, right? We can't do all the things at all the times. We can't digest food at all the times, metabolize food. So we're optimized to do those things at certain times of day based on the cycle. Like, when does it make the most sense to do these things? So that's, sleep, metabolize food, dodge UV radiation. So when does the body put up its shield, essentially? Defending ourselves against invading pathogens. The list goes on. But these clocks we have are not precision timekeepers. They tick at about 24 hours a day, and not exactly. So in order to keep synced to the earth and all these rhythms, we need regular calibration. So that's where this regular exposure to earthly cycles like light and dark comes into play. We need to get that exposure. We need to be connected to the environment in order to keep our circadian clocks in sync with the 24-hour Earth day. And the primary cue is the sun. But also, we don't all tick the same. So I mentioned that our clocks tick a little. Should I got my clock here? Speaking of clocks. Okay. So some of us have clocks that are ticking a little slower. Some are ticking a little faster. Some are orienting slightly different with the sun. And this is why some of us might be more like early birds, and some of us like night owls, right? So that is your chronotype. I don't know if anybody's heard that term, chronotype. But that is we can, formally say that it's kind of our propensity to sleep and do other activities at certain times according to the earthly day. And that propensity will change throughout our lives. So a lot of you probably know this, especially if you've had children or have been a teenager. At adolescence, our clocks shift later. So we're more biologically inclined to be a night owl. So speaking of, how many people here consider yourselves a night owl? Okay, how many an early bird? See, okay, how about in between? Okay, majority in between. Yep. So this is a nice sample. The broader studies have found that there are slightly more night owls than early birds, and most of us fall in between. But there is this idea that obviously we vary, right? There's a wide range of ways in which our clocks orient with the earth. And there could be good reason for that. I've talked to some scientists who note that our ancestors, they were living in maybe small villages or camps, and it was beneficial to have somebody awake at all times watching out, right, for an invader. So this is an evolutionarily, advantageous thing that we have these different clocks, and we know it's genetic. But we also are understanding that it can be influenced by our behavior and our environment. The circadian rhythm is malleable. You can think of it like that. And that is why it has also been exacerbated by modern life. So we might naturally be inclined to be somewhere on the spectrum, a little different, more early bird or night owl, but our modern life is actually stretching those differences out. So night owls might be more extreme night owls, and we'll get into why here in a moment. And early birds may even be more extreme early birds. And there is really one principal offender that is causing this exacerbated spread, as well as, wait, did I do something here? No. Oops. Not yet. Can't see me juggling yet. Okay. Is there any way to get that off the screen? Oh, what am I doing? Whatever, we'll just let it go. Okay. So anyway, yes. So there's one offender that tops the list. And this is going to get into my other adventure. One of the other adventures I took for my book research was spending 10 days, 50 feet underground in a Cold War era bunker. And I entertained myself. One of the ways was juggling. So over the course of those 10 days, as you might guess, I lost rhythm and coordination with the juggling. But my idea was that I wanted to cut myself off from all those cues that we know we need to keep our clocks in sync with the earth. It's a very good question. I didn't. So we'll get to that. But yeah, I went down there without any clocks. So, and that involved actually having to tape over some clocks that were down there, because this was no ordinary Cold War era nuclear missile silo in Arkansas. This was the man had actually purchased this from the government and souped it up into this luxurious Airbnb. It was nuts, but it was complete with LED lights, as you can see there, that I could tune to different colors. So I had them all tuned to a dim red, which we know is the wavelength color least likely to affect our circadian rhythms. And then, yeah, all the digital time, which were everywhere. If you look around, it's amazing how many places the time shows up. So it's, yeah, very annoying, but I had to try to tape those over. And I avoided any other humans. So I was down there alone. And I also decked myself out with a bunch of devices to measure various rhythms in my body. So I was measuring my body temperature. I was measuring my heart rate. I was measuring my blood glucose levels, my sleep. Of course, I had like the Oura Ring, Fitbit, Garmin, like you name it. And then, yeah, I spent my time juggling, playing harmonica, trying to write with a typewriter. It was an interesting time. And it was later that I worked with scientists going over all that data and then pairing that with some diaries I'd kept, including some voice recorded notes with timestamps. And indeed, I found that about the time that I felt like I had this extreme case of jet lag and was becoming extra clumsy with the juggling balls and everything. And just like nauseous and, hot and sweaty at odd times of day. That was the same time that the data showed my rhythms, my heart rate rhythm, my temperature rhythm had fallen out of sync and also dampened. So we were looking at these, curves throughout the day. Like if you think about temperature, the lowest point, the highest point. And that whole curve the amplitude flattened and it was no longer tracking, comparably to the other rhythms. This is what happens when we get jet lag, right? This was just an extreme case of it. But I went to that crazy extreme just basically to, fully understand my own rhythms, to feel how that felt, to describe it in the book. But we're doing the same thing to ourselves, or, some variation thereof above ground. We spend on average 90+% of our time indoors. And we, we're living our days and our nights under artificial light, which doesn't really change much, right? We're losing that contrast that we evolved with of a bright day and a dark night. So without that distinction, our circadian clocks are going to fall out of sync, and we're going to feel variations of that similar jet lag. And when I was talking earlier about that exacerbation of our differences between the early birds and night owls, something was explained to me that they called the Netflix effect. But if you are already leaning night owl and you stay up late under artificial lights, maybe watching Netflix, your melatonin is going to be delayed because light, particularly blue light, which I get into more in the book, but that is going to delay the onset of your melatonin that helps you fall asleep. It's also going to disrupt your rhythms. You're more likely then to sleep in the morning, miss morning light, which is critical to recalibrate your rhythms back to being earlier, and it can just snowball. So that is kind of the idea why if you're, you could just be a slight night owl, but your behavior, your environment can make you a more extreme night owl. So that is just one of many, I call them wrenches in our clockworks. There's so many things that we do in modern society that is messing with our clocks. So, life indoors, artificial lighting, of course. Even if we are lucky enough, like I am, to have a window at my office, there's energy efficient coatings on windows that actually filter out a lot of the light that our bodies need to recognize day. Eyeglasses even are often coated with this blue light filter. I don't know if you've heard about that. I mean, I didn't even know about this until recently. I've started wearing glasses. That's filtering out some of that key information that our bodies need to know it's daytime. At night is fine, but during the day, not a good idea. We eat late at night. Also not good for our rhythms. Our ancestors ate during the day, daylight hours primarily. We tend to, eat whenever we want. It could be a midnight snack. It's easy with our refrigerators and our microwaves and our 24-hour stores, right? There's the shift work, which is an obvious disruptor. Daylight saving time, as we very a little too familiar right now, still recovering. Won't get into it, but even the way our time zones are drawn are not necessarily rational. We travel internationally. And then another one that I'm particularly passionate about is these early school start times, as well as work times. So we have middle and high schoolers that are going to school around that time of adolescence when their clocks are drifting later, biologically backwards. And then work start times as well. For a lot of people, those times don't line up with their inner clocks. And so they're also being thrown off. So another question for you. Who here wakes up with an alarm clock on work days? Nice. Okay. Well, that's a happy medium, I guess. Still an alarm clock, though. That was less than half. Did I get that right? Raise your hand if you don't wake up with an alarm clock. Nice. Okay. That's unusual. The population statistics suggest 80% or so of working adults. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm lucky that I usually don't have to use one anyway as a freelancer, but yeah, on average, it's like 80% of working adults use an alarm clock, and that is a telltale sign of circadian disruption. That means you're waking up before your body wants to, before your inner clock's ready. Sure, go ahead.
I'm scared I'm gonna miss my alarm clock, that I would actually wake up like 10 minutes before my alarm clock.
That's a real phenomenon. Oh, the question yeah, so yeah, an audience member just mentioned that she wakes up ahead of her alarm sometimes, just maybe anxious because you needed to get up. And that is a thing. I mean, that's another sign of these internal clocks, right? That it's just like ready. I mean, that's kind of a different thing that I didn't really get into in the book, but that's real. And you can also, if you have strong circadian rhythms and go to bed and get up at the same time, you will find often that you'll just wake up, right ahead of your alarm or at that time. So that's a very real thing. So you mean when you wake up, the natural wake up?
It's not my line of business.
Yeah, the question was, how does this line up with REM sleep? I mean, I can tell you one relevant piece I actually should have mentioned is that if you wake up with an alarm, it's the last hours of sleep that tend to be heavier with the REM. And that is really critical. So I'm thinking about this in the context of, say, a teenager who had to set their alarm for 6 a.m. because they have to be at school at 7:20. Renton High School still start that early. And if they're like, if they only 6 hours into sleep and they are woken up by their alarm clock, they're losing out on a lot of that REM sleep, which happens at the end of the night. And that is critical for learning, for making memories, for a whole laundry list of things. So, I mean, I'm not sure if that answers your question, but yeah. So, and that sleep problems is just one of many of the consequences of circadian disruption. This is the last negative slide, I promise. We're going to get to the positive stuff, but it can impact your productivity, your performance, your mood, not a shocker, weaken your immune system, cause GI troubles, metabolic and weight issues. We'll get into a little more of what particular issues come up there. And then there's also more and more research that is connecting circadian disruption with increased risks of heart disease, neurodegenerative diseases, even cancer. Good news! The science, which is just really still emerging, but like growing rapidly, is also pointing to ways that we can rescue our rhythms and ways in which we can do this as individuals, and then also things we can do more broadly as a society to help the broader public health. So we'll start with the personal changes. So I point to 3 kind of key things that we can all do. Or, hopefully some of these you can do. Everybody has certain amount of wiggle room in their lives, but the first is contrast. So that's increasing the brightness of your days and the darkness of your nights to help tell your body and help it differentiate day from night. The second is constricting when we eat, and that includes caloric drinks. But if you can consolidate the hours in which you eat during the day, the science suggests that is going to strengthen your circadian rhythms. We're going to go into a little more detail shortly. And then finally, consistent. And that is particularly sleeping at the same time every day, but also eating and exercising. Thinking about having your body anticipate these changes and being ready to do the right things at the right time on a consistent basis. So that first one, contrast. So get outside. I mean, how do we create this contrast, right? We're not going to be camping in a sunflower field or, moving back to the outdoors like our ancestors, but we can try to maximize the minutes we're outdoors during the day. even on a Seattle winter day, gloomy, the extent of the light outside is still so much brighter than what you would get indoors, like exponentially brighter. So really paying attention to getting as much light as you possibly can outside. Morning light in particular is key for recalibrating your rhythms and kind of pulling them back to the 24-hour earthly day. I put on here, leave off the sunglasses at least sometimes, because again, if we're thinking about a winter day in Seattle, we may not have access to that many photons. So just really trying to maximize how much we can get to a point. You know, you don't want to squint and damage your eyes either. And then when you have to be indoors, optimizing the daylighting if you have that option. Not everybody has a corner office with a window, but every chance you can get in front of a window. And thinking about, like, for me, the way I had my office set up at home, where my desk was, I talk about this in the book, but I basically moved it half a foot, and I drastically increased how much circadian stimulating light reached my eyes. I was using a spectrometer. It's basically wearing it as a third eye around my head, and I could see it because it was actually acting as my eyes, like what was getting to that master clock in my brain through these third photoreceptors in the eyes that I talk about in the book that we know are connected. And I originally had the window so it was like, wait, how was it? It was too far this way, so my eye wasn't really in front of it, if that makes sense. And so I pulled my desk back so I could actually have the window in front of my eye. So anyway, little tweaks like that, use of reflective materials, everything to try to enhance the brightness. And then finally, science is also helping us fill in where daylight can't reach to a point. But there are pretty fancy novel LED lights now that we can tune to different colors and to different intensities. So this kind of brings up the origin story for me getting obsessed with circadian rhythms. Growing up in Seattle, I suffered through what a lot of us know of the long dark winters and kind of having that seasonal affective disorder and struggling to go to school in the dark through the winter. But it wasn't until I moved back to Seattle after my time on the East Coast when I got an invite to tour Safeco Field when it was still Safeco, and the Mariners locker room when they had installed some new LED lights. And in the locker room, I'd never heard of this before, but they had put in circadian lighting. What's that? But they had lights that would shift in color and intensity. So before games, they made them bright and blue to energize the players. And then after the games, they would warm the hue and dim the light to help the players relax and sleep and get up the next day for the next game. And they talked about how this would strengthen their rhythm. So I was floored and fascinated and hopeful that maybe the Mariners could actually win more games. I don't know if that really panned out, but that let me down. What was that? Maybe next year. There's always next year. Yeah. But yeah, this idea is being used now in schools, classrooms, in hospitals. I toured Vulcan a few years ago where they had installed these lights, and I've got them in my house now. So they're a thing. They're still not the same as the sun. Nothing's gonna ever compare to the real thing, but the technology is getting better, which is also creating a Wild West because there's not really standards for this. That's a whole nother thing I talk about in the book. But the general idea has a lot of potential and could make a difference. And then on the topic of brighter days, so sunlight does more than just address our circadian rhythms, right? It also has directly energizing effects, as those lights in the locker room also we're taking advantage of. It obviously can improve our mood. And some really cool new studies that are finding the benefits of specific wavelengths of light. So this is also outside of the circadian realm, but like red light's healing properties, near infrared light, violet light having potential for enhancing metabolism, it's something to be on the lookout for in the near future. Some pretty cool science that's coming through. And then on the other end of the day, we need to be darkening our nights, right? So this is a pretty easy one. I mean, turn off the lights. I have started just using, the picture there is my apartment at night. I have electric candles spread around. My friends make fun of me, but I find it really cozy. I can just like turn them on with a remote. And our eyes, our eyes are pretty good. They can adjust to pretty dim light if we give them a chance. Turn off the lights and then just sit there for 15 minutes and see how much you can see. You'll be amazed. So, and yeah, screens get a lot of notoriety for, their potential impact on our circadian rhythms and sleep. That's real, but I think overlooked is just the broader environment around yourself. Those overhead LED lights can be really disruptive to our sleep and our circadian rhythms. So just, focusing on dim and warm at the end of the day to increase that contrast. All right, so to that other second C, how many hours between your first and last calorie of the day? Anyone here eat within a 6-hour or less window? Probably not. 7 to 9? Wow, okay. Couple. 10 to 12? Do you really? Really? Okay, I'm impressed. 13 to 15. Anyone? 16 or more? Okay. Well, this group's impressive already. The studies show, I believe it was like on average, like 15 hours is what Americans eat between, and basically from the moment they get up in the morning to right before they go to bed. That's pretty common. So you guys are doing good. But yeah, the scientists I talked to are like really, 10 hours is a really good goal of trying to eat within that window. Even 12 is pretty decent. So doing good here. And the idea is really so again, thinking of how our bodies evolved with the rotating planet, we really want to be eating when our body is ready to handle those incoming calories. And the science is suggesting that it's like late morning, early afternoon is when our bodies are really most primed to do that. And so that's also when we should be concentrating in those heavier meals. So sort of the opposite of the traditional American diet, we should be, there's, not my quote, but people say, eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, dinner like a pauper. So flip that, we've kind of flipped that around from the traditional. And this whole new area of circadian science is looking into this idea of time restricted eating, which is very much like the fasting diets that have been popular for a while. It's a little more rigorous. It's consistent. It's really just trying to consolidate those hours and do it on a consistent basis. And they're finding quite a few promising, findings from these studies, between not just weight loss, which might be an obvious one, but lower risk of chronic diseases. And this is still only in animal studies at this point, but they're finding hints of potential substantial improvements to longevity. So this one mouse study that I talked to researchers about, they found that by restricting the mice to only eat during the 12 hours that they're up, which is our nighttime, right? That they, rather, as opposed to having food available at all times, they actually lived 35% longer lives. And they're thinking this has to do with reduced inflammation. And a lot of that is, again, the metabolic system and how disrupted it can be, or how much disruption we can do to it by throwing food at it at a time it can't handle it and it's not ready to. I'm sorry?
Recovery time.
And no recovery time. Yeah, that was a comment. Yeah, absolutely. Right. Our bodies need that time to, it's already shutting down or should be shutting down in the evening. We need to let it, let it rest. All right, the last C. How much does your sleep schedule change between work nights and free day nights or weekend nights. So we're thinking here, we're going to get to it, but it's called social jet lag. So we're looking at the difference between the midpoint of your sleep on like a work day versus a non-work day, if that makes sense. So anyone here like not change their schedule at all? Same. All right. Yeah. Okay, how about 1 to 2 hour difference? Okay. 3 to 4? Ooh, uh-oh, getting up there. 5 or more? Anyone? Okay, good. All right. So this fits the average from the studies as well. Yeah, the bigger the number, the less good. I'm sure that's pretty clear. So you want to keep that minimal. You want to minimize that misalignment between the, I mean, you can think of it as the misalignment between the inner clock and the social clock, right? Which is really hard to do for a lot of people. You can think again about high school students. Like it's basically impossible because yeah, they're going to want to catch up on sleep on the weekends. And that's the same for a lot of workers who are forced to get up earlier than they want to on work days. And there's really interesting new science coming out suggesting that when you sleep may be at least as important as how long you sleep, which I find pretty fascinating as far as, longevity, chronic disease go. So all this kind of comes to the same point of it's about time, right? It's about when you see the light. It's about when you eat. It's about when you sleep. And beyond our individual changes that we can make, we can gain a lot more ground if we can, as a society, make some bigger, broader changes, right? So we can be thinking about those school start times. We can be maybe relaxing work schedules. I wrote an op-ed for The Guardian a couple of weeks ago on that idea of just like, certain workplaces could have perhaps more flexible start times to allow people to be working at their peak and come in not sleep deprived, maybe more productive. Running short on time here, but yes, there's other things we could do. We can think about how to help support shift workers more with certain kinds of scheduling. We can think about, bringing more light into buildings, through architecture, through urban planning. We can address light pollution indoors and outdoors. And then at a policy level too, thinking society-wide, there's certain segments of the population that are more likely to have less access to daylight during the day and to too much light at night. So the same population that might be living in a basement apartment, for example, might be the same that is working in a warehouse or a back of a house space. They may not have access to a safe outdoor space to get daylight, right? They may be more likely to do shift work. And then at the end of the day, they might be in a space where street lights are beaming into their bedroom window. I walked through some social housing complexes during my book research, and sure enough, these big LED blasting lights, to promote safety in these complexes were basically pointed into bedroom windows where people didn't have blackout shades. So something to, I think this idea of darkness deserts, daylight deserts is something we could be thinking more about. So again, there's hope. We can reconnect and rescue our rhythms. And then as I get into in the book, there's also other ways we can leverage the science to do some pretty cool things, just how to optimize your days for better productivity, better performance in sports, again, social equity, timing medications to improve their efficacy and reduce side effects, ways in which this can be leveraged for agriculture, environmental sustainability. And if we're really desperate, I really don't want to think about it because we need to be focusing on Earth. But if we're really going to live on Mars, these things are going to be important as well. So, all right, I'll stop there for questions.
So if you have questions, there is a microphone there. Please, you can lift it out of its holder and then turn it on. And for those of you that are joining us virtually, be sure you put questions in the chat and then we will be able to ask them of our speaker. So go ahead.
I'll try your question. So I read that in Europe during the Middle Ages, that the circadian cycle was changing with seasons. That, for example, people, because they didn't have any uh, external light, they were only relying on the sunlight. They would have different circadian cycle during winter, where they were sleeping a lot more and doing a lot less. Whether in the summer, where there was a lot of work, especially in farms, they would sleep less and work a lot more and be awake a lot more. And so I don't know how it influenced our circadian, since, now we have external light
Right.
beyond the natural light.
That's a really good question. And I don't have a really good answer for it, but I will say that, and I don't know that the scientists have done any hard studies on this, but they do suggest that even still today, even with our artificial light, depending on your latitude, winters, we tend to sleep longer, and summers, we sleep shorter. And I think, this is more anecdotal, but when I was in Alaska, which we didn't get to, but I also did a camping trip in Alaska under the midnight sun. And the people I went camping with were Alaskans, and they were talking about how they really do, like, the summertime, they're just kind of they're awake all the time, kind of manic, and then the winter is sort of depressive, right? It's just they just sleep a lot longer. So I think depends where you are. And there's probably some genetic component there, and then maybe that's again latitude wise, because I know that there's certain cultures, I think it's the Finns and Lapps in Finland. I'm trying to remember. There's a study that found that, like, depending on when they moved there, they were like more likely to be susceptible to seasonal affective disorder and things like that. So the genetic predispositions, certainly have changed, and I think that could also could be true for how long you sleep in the winter too, I suppose. But really interesting. Thank you. Other questions?
Can you help us get over jet lag traveling internationally?
I can certainly try. Yeah, I talk about this a fair bit in the book, but there are ways you can manipulate light, potentially manipulate melatonin, and your eating as well. So, I mean, the general rule of thumb is to, like, try to prepare before you take to the air. Try to slowly adjust, just like we can with daylight saving time, maybe a little bit, but if you're traveling more time zones, it's a bigger deal. And then as soon as you get there, trying to get that morning light, right? And then trying to eat on the schedule of your destination city. Melatonin's an interesting tool because I was previously using it on occasion, and I would take it like right before I went to bed to try to help myself sleep. But as I learned from the scientists, if you haven't already heard, I might have been late to this, but you're really supposed to take it 2 or 3 hours before you go to bed, because that's when your body is naturally starting to pump out that melatonin. So you want to kind of time it with that natural rise. And you only want to take a little bit, like less than a milligram. So kind of putting those things together. But there are caveats, like depending on how many time zones you travel. Like I talked about in the book, I went to Europe, and based on what my inner clocks were thinking compared to the local time, I was way off, so that I was before the midpoint of my sleep, or before when my core body temperature hit its bottom. And if you expose yourself to light at that point, your body is actually going to rewind its clock because it thinks, oh, the sun has not even set yet. Whereas this idea of getting morning light is actually trying to do the opposite to your clocks, because if you get light after the mid bar, when your body temperature hits its lowest, then it's like, okay, the sun is already up. If that makes any sense. It's very nuanced and complicated. I talk about it more in the book, but yeah, you want to make sure, you just got to have to be really careful with the timing if you've traveled a long distance. But generally speaking, if it hasn't, if you don't travel more than 5 time zones, you're probably safe. Trying to get that morning light is probably the most powerful. You're welcome.
I got 2 questions. I got 2 questions. The first question was about Mars.
Okay.
And basically, JPL actually has a Mars clock. So when the rovers are actually doing stuff, they're on their own little whack time zone, which is God only knows how many years away from Earth,
Yep.
which I thought was kind of cool. and you actually get that on your clock from NASA on most of the app stores. The second question was the Harvard Women's Study, because that one might be a very interesting one, especially because so much shift work is done by nurses.
Yes. Okay. So, well, to the Mars question, I actually interviewed some JPL scientists for the book, and they were talking about like wearing two different well, one guy had been doing this for a long time before the apps. So he had like two different watches, Mars time and Earth time. And yeah, they were trying to do things to manipulate their clocks to go longer than 24 hours, because Mars, of course, is longer than 24 hours, but they were all a mess, not fun. And then I'm sorry, so women's health study, shift work. Well, I'm sorry, what was your specific question about that?
Did you look at any of the data?
I don't know if any of the research I quote is specifically from that study. It probably is, because that is a massive study, and they've pulled out they've done a lot of hypotheses with that. So I mean, generally speaking, yeah, the research shows it's bad. But again, on the positive side, understanding why it's bad, they're finding some ways in which we can mitigate the consequences. For shift workers, if they're not doing rotating shift work, trying to get in, if they do like flip back to trying to be on the daytime, like with families, friends on their off days, then having them only eat meals during daylight hours and trying to keep their meal schedule consistent, even if they're having to work the other hours, that actually could help reduce the consequences, especially for the metabolic disease risks.
And the other thing too, a lot of nurses, they're actually on 12-hour shifts for about like three or 4 days, if memory serves.
Yeah, yep, exactly. So if they can try to, eat like right before and after work, and then stick to that schedule on their off days, it's one way around. Yeah.
I'm not sure if you talk about this in the book or not, but out of curiosity, then you did mention like the efficacy of medications and things. Out of curiosity, do they have any research? Has anybody done any studies about like when you get cancer treatments and radiation? What times of day? Have they updated any of that? Is your body more willing to accept it if there's UV in the sky or not?
Very good question. Yeah, I think this is so fascinating. If I had more time, I could have done a whole presentation on that. Chapter 12 in the book is all about circadian medicine. And yeah, it's really still early, but there's more and more studies, in particular with cancer research or cancer drugs, that are finding that potential benefit of certain times of day. So there was, for example, I think this was published 2024, so last year. But there was a retrospective study done of like the main go-to glioblastoma drug that the FDA had approved because it extended survival by 2.5 months, right? They found that if the patient took that same drug in the morning versus afternoon, it could have this reverse. So don't, fact check me before you quote me. That they actually improved survival by 3.5 months. So even more than what the FDA approved the drug for, just by, adjusting the time that they took that drug. And they're finding similar things with chemotherapy. I mean, there's some drugs for like asthma that we've long known are more beneficial at certain times of day. Low dose aspirin. The list is lengthening, but the scientists I talked to are basically like, most drugs, especially if they're, short acting, there's going to be a better time to take those, because we know our entire physiology is changing all the time. So, when's the time that part of your physiology is ready to take in that drug, metabolize the drug, or, whatever it's acting upon? What is the timing of those things? So, it's going to take research, and that's right now, like, I get into all the roadblocks there, but like there's ways in which we can overcome those to make it practical, do the research to get these answers, and then translate that to the clinic.
Hi, a question. I read somewhere before, now I just Googled it. I can read it. Here, 15 people have emerged from a cave in southwest France after 40 days underground in an experiment.
Yep.
Absent the clock. Actually, many of them come out, thought they stay in the cave less than 40 days.
Yeah.
Actually, they kept some kind of rhythm
Mhm.
after a few days, but the rhythm is longer than 24 hours a day.
Yeah,
Seems that way, but everybody's slightly different, but they are all pretty much longer than 24 hours.
exactly. Yeah, no, I remember seeing that. And that was, I mean, I didn't stay 40 days. I only stayed 10 days underground, but it was similar for me. So yeah, in addition to my clocks like falling out of sync from each other, I also had a longer day. So I think it was day 8, I was completely flipped. I was 12 hours off from people above ground. And my overall clock, I think, calculated, I would say like 24.8 hours a day or something like that. So same thing happened to me. And I think the evidence suggests most of us would do that. And it's partially because there's more of us that are lean night owl. And again, not having that contrast between day and night is exacerbating that night owlness. So we actually get longer than we would if we actually have some sun to calibrate with.
I have a couple of questions. One of them being, is there a cutoff from when we should be receiving UV rays? Like you say to get morning light. My African answer would be like, don't be outside at this certain time because the UVs are not good for you. Like, is there actually a benchmark for that? And like a little backstory, because I work from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m.
Huh.
And so for my mental health, I take a break from work in the middle of the day, which is like 10 a.m. To be outside. So I'm trying to figure out if that's the best time to receive a moon light.
Great question. So, well, first, the idea of morning light calibrating our clocks, it's most powerful if it's like within the first hour or two of getting up in the morning. I mean, it kind of depends on your goal too. If you're like an extreme early bird, which I talked to this one guy who could not stay awake past 7 p.m.
Wow.
I also talked to a woman who like was an extreme night owl and like she was thriving with a job that worked through the night. Anyway, there's a wide spectrum of us. That in that guy's case, like he wants to, stay up later, so he doesn't want that morning light. But if you're trying to, keep yourself getting up early, getting light within an hour or two of getting up is ideal to
Even if it's dark.
and if
when I
it's
wake
dark, I mean, that's where you can play with the happy lamps
Okay.
and some of
Red
these
and
other
orange,
sources
all that.
of bright blue light. I didn't get into all these details, but again, it's like about the wavelengths, right? So the blue light in particular. So SAD lamps will have that. And then some of these new tunable LEDs I talked about can provide something a little closer to the sun. But yeah, in the winter here, sun doesn't rise till late, and it'll be even a lot later if we go permanent daylight saving time.
Oh gosh. And then my follow-up to that was, it's hard for me to answer whether I'm an early bird or a dove because I feel like I've been conditioned I feel like my entire life to wake up at like 5, 6 a.m., become the oldest of 4 kids, so to get up early to get them ready. It was a laughing joke in college. I'd be like, I can be out partying until 2 a.m., but my body naturally wakes up at 6 a.m. I'm like, but does that really make me an early bird? Or is that just conditioning?
So it's partially conditioning. So again, our clocks are malleable to a point. And so you're genetically predisposed to something, but you may not know it. I think for a lot of people, we're forced to live, according to whatever social schedule
It is getting
we have to
harder when I
abide
get
by.
older.
Yeah.
For sure.
Oh yeah, for sure. So like, I don't know, if you go on vacation for an extended period of time, or at least once you retire, kids out of the house or whatever, then you just like try to live by what your body's telling you to do and see. I think that's the only way to really know what your natural clocks do. But yeah.
I'll just mention something. I'm lucky to be dual citizen from France and the US. And I noticed how different the working laws are between the two countries and how workers are considered in the two countries.
Huh.
In France, you mentioned the circadian and the importance of light. It's unlawful to work in an office more than 4 hours without having daylight. You cannot have an office in the basement with no daylight,
Right.
no windows.
Yep.
And one of my daughters who initially worked in the US is now in France. And she worked in France, and her manager came to her in the first week and said, our company can be fined because you're working at your desk and you're supposed to take a lunch break and you're supposed to be taking a break for eating.
Wow. Well, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I remember learning that like a lot of European countries are a little ahead of us on recognizing some. Yeah, right.
Do we have any questions online? Okay, so I encourage you to chat with Lynn afterwards, but please join me in thanking her now. Great. I'm gonna have you stay.